We're going to be looking at workbook exercises for Pratico Van Pelt, Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Chapter 3. Before I do that, I'm going to go through some review of some basics. If you feel like you already have the concepts of syllables and Dagesh Laney, Dagesh Forte, and vocal and silent Shewa down, you can move directly to the video where I'll just start into the workbook exercises. But for a basic review, continue on here. We are looking at some concepts from Curie Pratico and Miles Van Pelt, Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Grammar, third edition, and the workbook exercises will be coming from the Basics of Biblical Hebrew workbook, third edition, and there's the bibliography information right there. So let's look first at syllable rules. This comes out of chapter 3 of Pratico Van Pelt. There's two basic rules. The first one is that every syllable begins with a consonant and has one vowel. So that's a simple rule. It has to begin with a consonant, has only one vowel. And then syllables are either open, meaning consonant vowel, or closed, consonant vowel consonant. That's very similar to English. We have open and closed syllables in English as well. So here's an example. We have the Hebrew word davar, which means word, can also mean matter or thing. And this is going to have two syllables. And so the first syllable is an open syllable. We see it has a consonant, dalet, and a vowel, comets. And then the second syllable is a closed syllable. It has consonant, bait, vowel, patak, and then consonant, resh. So we see consonant, vowel, that's an open syllable, and then consonant, vowel, consonant, that's a closed syllable. This is on page 16 of Pratico and Van Pelt. Now, a Dagesh Laney, as opposed to a Dagesh Forte, occurs only in certain narrow circumstances. It occurs a lot, but the range of circumstances in which it occurs is relatively narrow. So first of all, it occurs only in what we call the Bagad Kafat letters. Let's go through those letters. We got bait, that's where we get the B from Bagad Kafat. We have Gimel, there's where the G sound comes from. We have Dalet, that's our D sound. We have Kaf, that's our K sound. We have Pe, that's where our F or P sound comes from. It's just both sounds come from that letter. The one without the Dagesh is a F sound. The one with the Dagesh is a B sound, or a P sound. And then we have Tau. So those are our Bagad Kafat letters. And you could say Bagad Kapat if you wanted to. When a Pe is in the middle of a word, it usually has the F pronunciation, so we say Bagad Kafat. But you can say Bagad Kapat. The main thing is that you know what the letters are. Now, Dagesh Forte, by contrast, can occur in any letter except a guttural or resh. And so looking at our gutturals, we have the aleph, we have hey, we have chet, it's got that ch sound, chet, and we have ayin. And then resh is technically, it's a semi-guttural. It acts like a guttural most of the time. Once in a blue moon, you will see a Dagesh Forte in the Hebrew Bible in a resh. But it's so rare that it's simpler just to say that the Dagesh Forte does not occur in gutturals or resh. So let's look at the Dagesh Forte versus the Dagesh Laney. If a Dagesh is not in a Bagad Kafat letter, it is a Dagesh Forte. Well, we already said that a Dagesh Laney could only be in a Bagad Kafat letter, so logically, if it's not in a Bagad Kafat letter, then it has to be a Dagesh Forte. All right, fair enough. If the Dagesh is in a Begad Kafat letter and comes after a vowel, either a full vowel or a half vowel, then it's a Dagesh forte. And then finally, if the Dagesh is in a Begad Kafat letter and does not come after a vowel, then it's a Dagesh Lani. So we see that there is a limited set of parameters that give you a Dagesh Lani. So it has to be a Begad Kafat letter and it does not come after a vowel. Now we see a lot of Dagesh Lanis in the Bible, but the circumstances that tell you it's a Dagesh Lani are pretty restricted. So we can add a little corollary here. If a Dagesh comes after a vowel, it is a Dagesh forte, period. Many people like to look at this first rule. If it's not a Begad Kafat letter, then it's a Dagesh forte because you don't even have to worry about vowels. But if you do see a vowel and you notice it, then you know that a Dagesh that comes after it is not a Dagesh Lani. It has to be a Dagesh forte. Okay, let's look at how the vocal and silent Shewa fits into all of this. So if a Dagesh comes after a simple Shewa, then we have to determine if that Shewa is vocal or silent. So after a silent Shewa, which means no vowel, then it's going to be a Dagesh Lani. And we can almost assume at this point that it will be a Begad Kafat letter. So after a silent Shewa, you're not going to see a Dagesh forte. So you can pretty much take it to the bank that what comes after it will be in a Begad Kafat letter. Second rule then, after a vocal Shewa, which is a vowel, then a Dagesh will be a Dagesh forte. So let's look at some examples. First example is davar. Now notice that it does begin with a Begad Kafat letter, and there's no vowel before it because it's the beginning of a word. And so we have the Begad Kafat and no vowel, so this means we have a Dagesh Lani. Really, anytime we see a Dagesh at the beginning of a word, it's going to be a Dagesh Lani. You will never see a Dagesh forte at the beginning of a word. So at the beginning of a word, you see a Dagesh, you can take it to the bank, it will be a Begad Kafat letter, and it will be a Dagesh Lani. But there's no vowel before it, and it's a Begad Kafat letter. So those are the two conditions that we're looking for. Let's look at our second example. We have Isha, which is woman. We have the Dagesh in our second letter, the Sheen. So it's not a Begad Kafat letter, so we already know it's a Dagesh forte. It's also got a vowel before it. It's got this Hirik, which is a short vowel, but it's a full vowel. And so both of those tell us that we have a Dagesh forte. And our final example here is Mishpot. And that's an interesting example. It has a pei, and that is a Begad Kafat letter, where this Dagesh is, but it's coming after a silent Shewa. And because it's coming after a silent Shewa, that means there's no vowel. So it's Begad Kafat, there's no vowel before it, so it's a Dagesh Lani. We'll talk in a few minutes about silent Shewa versus vocal Shewa, but in this case we have a Dagesh Lani because it's a Begad Kafat letter and it's coming after a silent Shewa, which means there's no vowel. So now we need to look at how do we distinguish between a vocal Shewa and a silent Shewa. So just for review, a vocal Shewa is a vowel. It's called a half vowel, but it's a vowel. And a silent Shewa is not a vowel. It simply marks the end of a closed syllable. So here's a couple of rules. These actually are found in Pratico Van Pelt, and they are on pages 18 and 19. So if a Shewa comes immediately after a short vowel, it is a silent Shewa. We're going to come back and unpack what immediately means in a second. And opposite, if a Shewa does not come immediately after a short vowel, then it is a vocal Shewa. So there's our two rules. They're kind of the opposite of each other. If a Shewa comes immediately after a short vowel, it's a silent Shewa. Otherwise, it's a vocal Shewa. So the Dagesh forte, though, throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into things, because we said that a Shewa that comes immediately after a short vowel is a silent Shewa. But a Dagesh forte means that we're no longer looking at immediate when we're talking about the vowel that comes before it. So here's an example. We have Habarit. This means the covenant. And notice the bait here. This is a Bagad Kafat letter, but the Dagesh is coming after a vowel, this patak. So this has to be a Dagesh forte. And so even though our rule says that if we come after a short vowel, we will have a silent Shewa, remember that it says immediately after. This Dagesh forte now tells us that we're no longer immediate. So this Dagesh forte is now telling us that we have a vocal Shewa. So here's a summary. In this case, the vowel in the first syllable is a short vowel. So here we go, this ha, it's a short vowel, but the Dagesh comes after a full vowel, and so it's a Dagesh forte, and the Dagesh forte breaks our rule. In essence, it says it's no longer immediate, and so that Shewa is vocal. And we can extend that to say that a Shewa under a Dagesh forte is always vocal. So that provides a little bit of review, and now we are ready to take a look at the workbook exercises for Chapter 3 of Pratico and Van Pelt.